Welcome to whatever this is. And what this is me giving you guys an overview in the wonderful game of Dungeons and Dragons. I recorded a video on this topic, and it ended up being 90 minutes long, and I didn't want to edit it, so I'm not, and instead we're gonna do this live stream. And I thought, sorry, I have to adjust this window. I thought that doing this while very tired would actually make it so that I wouldn't get so excited and start explaining stuff or go off on tangents. That's the hope, anyway. Oh, these captions are in a bad place for this, aren't they? Oh no. Things are going well. Let me know how the sound levels are, because I am not listening to this. I am actually, oh god, I'm listening to a podcast because I absolutely need to be entertained when I'm doing this. This is probably too stretched out, isn't it? Let's see how that looks. But yes, oh no, that actually looks really good. Sweet. I need to be entertained while doing this, otherwise I will not be able to focus at all. Oh god, these captions. I was also doing this in the hopes that I wouldn't have to caption later, because I have auto captions. But I forgot that auto captions aren't exactly good. So please feel free to ask for clarification. A lot of this is going to be on the screen that I'll be reading, so hopefully it won't be too much of an issue. That's the dream anyway. Basically, I'm going to go over the game and some of the simple rules, and then we're going to walk through making a first level character together, because I understand that this is very intimidating for people who have not actually played before, and so I want to make it as accessible as possible, because I genuinely really love this game, and it has helped me through so many like personal issues. That sounds kind of odd to say, but I guess it's true. Personal issues. I found my boyfriend through it, so I want to share that with you guys. And that's, I think, all of my intro. Oh, I also updated my sub perks, so if you want to subscribe to me, I actually have perks besides emotes now, and they are pretty cool, so I encourage you to check them out. They are on my About page in one of the beautiful panels. But yeah, without further ado, I am just going to get into it. I'm going to attempt to use stream markers as well, because I want to try to organize this. But yeah, I guess that is the intro done, so I will put a marker. It says it worked, so hopefully it worked. Alright, let me pop on my podcast, and we will get into it. So what I'm using right now is a website called D&D Beyond. It is the official website by Wizards of the Coast, which is the company that makes the game. It is pretty useful, I would say. Okay, hold on. I can't listen to a podcast while I do this. I thought I could. I can't while I'm talking, so we're going to switch to music. That probably should have been obvious, but it wasn't. It's fine. There we go. Turn that down. Okay. So yeah, this is the official website, and I think it's really useful for beginners because it does a lot of the calculating for you. D&D has a lot of math, even though it's very like basic math, addition, subtraction, things like that. Although I love seeing people who are like engineers or doctors play D&D and forget how to add basic numbers. But D&D Beyond does a lot of that for you, so if you're getting overwhelmed by that, it's definitely something useful. And we'll go into more on what D&D Beyond does for you in terms of character sheet once we start building a character. But for now, what is D&D? So I have taken us to the new player guide, and I am just going to summarize it because even though this is the new player guide and it's an overview, it's still fairly in-depth and kind of long. So as I said, the goal here is to make this as accessible and not intimidating as humanly possible. And that's what I'm here for. Oh, there goes my mouse. I have so many cords. I'm also sitting in the dark right now. Anyway, so according to them, D&D, each player creates a character who is an adventurer and teams up with other adventurers played by friends. One player is the Dungeon Master, which is what DM stands for, and they sort of control the world. They create the adventures for the characters to go on, and you just generally have a good time. It's sometimes referred to as collaborative storytelling, but I tend to think of it as just playing imagination like you did when you were a kid, playing make-believe, except with slightly more math and dice. It's close enough. Other important terms that you should know, or hopefully know from this, D&D uses a lot of acronyms. For example, D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. I'm actually going to put them in the chat just so that I don't forget to define them later, because I'm sure I will use them. So, important terms. So we have D and D, which is often sort of pronounced or written as D&D. That is for Dungeons & Dragons, the name of the game. I'm trying to figure out how I can make this into a list without sending the message by mistake, but I don't think I can, so we'll just do spaces, I guess? Alright, the next one that's very important is TTRPG, which stands for Tabletop Role-Playing Game. Tabletop. I always forget where the hyphens go. And a tabletop role-playing game is the type of game that Dungeons & Dragons D&D is. So you're playing a role on a table as opposed to a video game. Obviously, it doesn't have to be a literal table. The DM, as I mentioned, which they didn't define, which is something I actually thought was kind of odd. Anyway, DM is the Dungeon Master, sometimes called the GM, Game Master. Okay, this list is not going to work. Maybe I'll just separate them with commas. It's fine. It's fine. Try to make things organized, but I've never tried to put a list in a Twitch chat before. Alright, so DM is Dungeon Master, which is the person running the game. Sometimes they're called a GM or Game Master, depending on if you're playing a different system and you don't technically have dungeons. A PC is a player character. So that is a character that you or your friends will be playing. So like real life, right? The actual people. Because the next thing, sort of the opposite of that, is an NPC, which is a non-player character. And a non-player character is played by the DM, and that is basically anyone else that you would encounter in the world. They are not being played by a player, therefore they are considered NPCs. It's the same thing in video games. When you encounter characters in a video game that are not played by you, assuming they are not played by another, real person, they are NPCs. The next important term is BBEG, which stands for Big Bad Evil Guy. This is sort of the overall bad guy or villain of your campaign, which is the next thing I'm going to talk about. So a campaign is not an acronym, but it's a term that you need. So a campaign is the sort of over story / saga of the game that you're playing. So you might go on lots of various arcs or adventures. People divide them in different ways. And those are, think of them as like chapters. But a campaign would cover everything in the world or the universe with your group of characters that are currently happening. So, for example, I would say think of a campaign as a book. So another book could be in the same universe, but might not have the same characters or be in the same time, right? And so that would be a separate campaign, whereas chapters in the same book might have slightly different plots or littler stories that all come together to make a bigger plot. They would still be considered in the same campaign, the same book. I hope that makes sense. That's the best way I can think to describe it. Other important words, and I'm sure I will be adding to this as I go on because lots of terms. And if you don't understand any of the terms, please let me know and I will describe them. I think I will submit this list into the chat right now, and then as we get to other parts, I will put those terms in. So that's the first set of terms. Whew. All right, so once you play, or now that you know the overview, They give you a how to play, which is the DM describes the environment. So a really simple way of looking at this is when you start a session, you say, what do I see? What's around me? And the DM, your dungeon master, will describe that for you. Then you and the other players will describe the desired action. So what do you want to do? That's kind of important to know, right? So let's say the DM says that I am in a room with 3 doors. I would probably say I want to go up to the door on the left and try to open it. And then the DM would narrate the results. Usually when you try to do something, you will have to roll for a certain skill to see if that thing will happen, because it's not always guaranteed, especially if it's a difficult thing. I will get into the different types of rolls when we get into the character creation, but just keep that in mind. So I would roll, and then depending on what I would roll, the DM would tell me if I can do the thing or not do the thing. So when we scroll down some more, they talk about the game dice, and there are a lot of dice used in D&D, which is probably one of the reasons why it seems so intimidating. So dice are called, as they say here, their name is the letter D and then the number of sides they have. So D4, D8, D6, D8, D10, D12, and D20. Sometimes also a D100. I had a huge amount of trouble remembering which die had which name and what they looked like. So another reason I really like this website is because they actually label the dice with the name, which is very useful. So if you need to just click on one, it will roll it for you, but you can also see which one you need immediately. So the core rule that they're describing here is how to use the dice. So you would roll the die, whatever die that you need to do the thing that you want, add a modifier, which I will explain, add bonuses or penalties, and then compare the total to a target, which is often known as a DC. I don't actually know what DC stands for, but it is the amount that you need to beat in order to do the thing. Then they have other rules. Honestly, these rules are kind of confusing, and I personally think the best thing about D&D is that you can just learn while playing it. So it's totally okay to go in and not entirely know what you're doing. If you're with a good group, they'll help you understand. This is also a good point to mention that no matter what group you end up joining, be sure to have safety rules mapped out. Groups do this in different ways, but generally it's a good idea to have some sort of system in place in order to help players and the DM feel as comfortable as possible at the table, avoiding any topics that could be triggering or upsetting, as well as letting each other know how you will communicate this. Do you want to use cards with an X or an O? Do you want to use a sort of stoplight system? Red means stop, yellow means be cautious, green be go, etc. Green means go. I'm not going to go too much into that here because I'm really just trying to focus on the mechanics, but definitely look that up for yourself or ask the table that you are joining because it is very, very important, and I don't think they talk about it on here. All right, now that we've gotten through all of that, we are going to get into creating a character. So to create a character, you go over to collections and you click my characters. I think you can also do tools, and that would take you to the character builder. We're here, I guess we can do that. So when you get to the character creator, there are 3 ways that you can create a character. Standard, which is picking things yourself, randomized, which would be the opposite of that, or a quick build, which is what they recommend for you. So I'm going to choose the standard option, and I'm not going to show the help text, although that is an option for you. I am just going to explain it myself because I think it'll be faster. So the first thing you can do is pick your character's name and photo. I usually leave this till the end, but obviously we need something as a placeholder, so we will go with, oh gosh, I can't come up with names on the spots. Let's do Ruby. That's totally not inspired by my Twitch name, totally not. As for the photo, I'm gonna leave that until we pick our race, which is another couple terms that we should note. So a race is sort of like a species in D&D. And then there is class, which is sort of like your job. Now, there's a lot of issues surrounding racism and things like that in D&D, and I highly encourage you to look into that before going into your table as well, because the official rules do include some of it, so I will point out some of the issues here, but I would just recommend using caution and, again, talking to the other people at your table and figuring out what sort of things would work best for you to make your game as comfortable and, unproblematic as possible. I went into this in way greater depth in my really long video, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to do that here. If you would like more information on that from me specifically, I would be willing to make a video dedicated specifically to that, but it's 12:20 in the morning and I don't feel qualified right now to give everything that needs to be said. Anyway, character preferences. When we're looking at sources, these are all the different possible things that you can draw on to create your character. So different sort of books and things like that. I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible. So we're not going to use any of this. But if you're curious what the terms mean, homebrew is stuff created by players or DM, so people that aren't a part of the company. So we'll call that what? Creations by company people? This makes sense. I know what I mean. Critical Role content. Critical Role is a very popular D&D stream, and their DM has created some really interesting stuff, so that's an option. Playtest is stuff that they are testing out but haven't released to the public yet. Magic the Gathering is a different game. Rick and Morty, I guess, is inspired by the TV show. Eberron, I honestly can't remember, but I feel like it's another land. Non-core D&D content, not entirely sure, but again, this is stuff you can research yourself. And if we're trying to make this as easy as possible, I wouldn't use it anyway. Check with your DM to see what they would allow. Then you decide if you want to allow digital dice rolling. We will be doing that. Optional features, we're just going to leave those off to make it simpler. Advancement type, this is important. So you have XP, which is experience points, or you have milestones. And these will determine how your character levels up. So gets better, essentially. I've actually never played a game where a DM has used XP, but if they do, it's essentially when you do X thing, you get X amount of XP. That was a lot of X's. And once you get the required amount of XP, your character will level up. Since I've never used this, I'm going to do milestones, which is basically when your DM decides, all right, you guys have done enough for your characters to level up. It's easier. Hit point. Hit points are health. I think I should just put that in as well. So hit points, often referred to as HP, are health. Very important. I'm going to send those in. And they can... So you get more health when you level up. And you can roll a die to figure out how much you get for that level. Or you can do what's called fixed, which is basically the computer will take the average of whatever die you would roll, and then just keep adding that, which is easier, so we're going to do that. We're just going to turn these off. Feats are special sort of like prizes or things that your character will be able to do when you level up. Multi-class will be choosing one or more classes, so a second class. We're just going to keep that off for now. Then we have level scaled spells. We're going to leave that on. Encumbrance, do you feel the weight of stuff you're carrying? Sure. This is just a display thing, and the character, public or private. So we're going to do that. Okay, again, I'm trying to do this really fast because I really don't want this to be too overwhelming. Anyway, here are the races. So D&D Beyond does not give you access to everything in the D&D world, but they do give you some access to different options. So you have options. Each race has different racial traits, which again is one of the problematic things where different races have different abilities, scores, or skills than other races. They also tend to have alignment, so basically deciding if an entire race is good or bad, which obviously is not great, so I would highly recommend avoiding that, but it will mention it on this website because D&D Beyond is not as progressive, I suppose, as we'd hope. So these are all the different races that are available on D&D Beyond for free. I'm not going to go into too much detail on all of them. You can look for yourself. So we're going to go basic. So let's just pick an elf. And we'll do a high elf. So when you click on the race, you get lots of information about them. And there are the racial traits, as I mentioned, which are things that only this race would have, as opposed to, well, not only, but that they would have that other races might not. Then there's all this lore, which we're just going to skim through, and then a description of all of these skills, which I am, quite frankly, not going to read. You can read them yourself. Once you decide on the race, you can choose it. Then it brings you to this page, which is the same thing. And it will let you know if there's anything you need to choose. Here, as you can see, we get an extra language and a cantrip, which is a spell that you can cast whenever you want. And that is, so you get one extra as an elf, and you also get an extra language, so you need to choose that. There are so many spells. They're all described on D&D Beyond, but you can also Google them. Google is really your best friend for most things. Okay, so intelligence is your spellcasting modifier as an elf. So I'm going to probably, I don't know, which one of these sounds fun. We'll do shock and grasp. Will be a lightning person. Then you can choose an extra language that you speak. Everyone in the D&D world speaks common. Obviously the world can change based on your DM, but in this it's common, and then elves, each race would speak their own language, and sometimes you get an extra language, which we do here. So we'll pick celestial, which would be like an angel language. Once you've chosen that, you need to pick your class, which, as I said, is like your job, sort of. And that determines really how your character is going to be. Can they cast magic? Are they more of a fighter? Etc., etc. And each class sort of corresponds to one stat or ability, I should say, needing to be the best. So it depends on how you want your character to be. If you want your character to be really smart, for example, I would recommend a wizard. They cast spells with their intelligence, and that is actually what we're going to do here. Again, once you click on the class, it will tell you some stuff about it. So here we can see that our hit die are a d6, which basically means we would roll a d6, the sort of like standard die in other games, the cube one, to get more health, and that's not the best thing. Wizards are not super strong. Primary ability is intelligence, and your saves are intelligence and wisdom. All of that basically means you'll want these stats to be high. And then it lets you know things that you will gain as you level up. So we will add that class. And we're just going to make a level 1 character, but as you progress, you will get more and more things. And as you can see here, there is an option to look at them if you were to click the plus. So as a wizard, when you start at level 1, you get 6 hit points, health, because they always give you the max, the highest number on your die, and then it would go from there. So we then choose proficiencies, which are skills that we are proficient in. And that means that you would add an extra bonus when you use them. So the skill options for wizards are Arcana, Magic, History, Insight, Investigation, Medicine, and Religion. So let's go with Arcana and History. At first level, you also get Spellcasting, which means you will get to use spells, and Arcane Recovery, which means that you will be able to get spell slots back. And spell slots are essentially, what's the easiest way to describe this? I'll show you when we get on the chart so that it's a little bit more visual. But you also have to have spells. So for a wizard, and each magic casting class is different and as to how they would use their magic, right? So I tend to play warlocks, and they have very few spell slots, so they can only cast like 3 spells a day. Not great. Wizards, however, have a spell book, which means they will learn tons of spells, and then they have to prepare X amount per day, and then they can only use those prepared spells even if they know other ones. So as a level 1 wizard, we get 3 cantrips and 1 spell, I think. Very fun. So a cantrip is a spell that does not require a spell slot, which essentially means you can cast them as often as you want. So same with before, you can click on whichever ones you want, and they will give you a description if you need them. So I'm just going to grab a couple random ones here because I don't want to go too in depth. But if you click on each spell, you'll see the information for things. The casting time, 1 action, which would be 6 seconds in combat. 1 turn, essentially. The range, how far it would go. Components, some people use this, some don't. But it depends on if you need something to cast the spell, like ingredients. And then the description, the damage, things like that. I think I grabbed 3 of those. Did I? Yes, I did. You can also filter by spell level, which is really helpful if you don't remember what spells you've gotten. So we're going to get our first level spell. I'm pretty sure we can only learn 1, but we will see. Let's do... What do we want to do? Let's do Hideous Laughter. That sounds fun. So we now have 1 spell. I don't actually know if wizards are able to learn more. Haha, can I just learn all of them? See, I don't play wizards very much, and I always get confused about the learning thing. Learn spells versus prepared spells. I genuinely don't know, so we'll just see when it tries to stop me. I would imagine your DM would have a limit of how many spells you as a first level wizard could learn, but I'm gonna put them all on because I can. Anyway, now we are at ability scores, aka stats, statistics, and those are the skills that pretty much build your character. They are strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. There are different ways to generate them. You can do a standard array, which is they will give you 6 scores. You put them into whatever category you want. Manual or rolled, so you would roll X amount of dice, and then what the totals would be, then you would assign those. That always confuses me because lots of DMs have different rules for that. The other option is point buy, which would be you have a pool of points and you can divide them however you want. Now, I am doing this quickly, so we're going to choose a standard array. So you have the scores of 8, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, and you would divide them up between each skill. Now, as a wizard, we cast spells with our intelligence, so we're going to want our intelligence to be high. So we would pick the highest number. The next one is wisdom. That's also very important for a wizard. It is a saving throw, which is your second best skill. So you have 2 saving throws. They are usually considered your first and second best skill. So they should be the highest. So we'll put a 14 for wisdom. Then we kind of need to think, okay, how do we want our wizard to be? Wizards don't need to be strong, so I would put that as the lowest stat. Then we have 10, 12, and 13. I think I will make my wizard very healthy, kind of charismatic, and not very dexterous. Then if you scroll down here, you will see any other bonuses that you might get, so racial bonusments, ability improvements, that is something you get as you level up, and anything else that might be there. We don't really have much of that right now, so it's fine. Then we go over here, and we will get our character description. You need a background. Well, you don't need a background. It depends on your DM again. A lot of this depends on what table you're at. But choosing a background gives you certain skills as well as items. And the options for free are Acolyte, Criminal, Folk Hero, Haunted One, Noble, Sage, and Soldier. My apologies. I will choose a Sage, so a Scholar, because we're smart. So this gives you more skills to be proficient in. We're gonna go with, I think, Investigation, and we'll do Stealth. To clarify, you will have scores for all of these skills and abilities. These are just choosing which ones you're better at, essentially. We also get more languages. Let's do, gosh, I don't know. Infernal, it's demons or devils. I always get demons and devils confused. One speaks Abyssal and one speaks Infernal. I don't know what the difference is. No one has explained it to me, or if they have, I've forgotten. Then as a background feature, you get something called a researcher, which means basically if you don't know something, you know where you can find it. They also give you suggested characteristics, so if you don't want to create your backstory and personality from scratch, you can choose some of these. I'm not going to do these, but they give you personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws, and you can either roll for these, pick a random one, or just choose some. Then you also have character details. So your alignment, as I mentioned, is basically from good to evil and lawful to chaotic. That's up to you. Faith if you want it. Lifestyle is essentially how much money you'll spend. And then you can add in physical characteristics, personal characteristics, and any other notes you might want to. Whew, we're doing great. We're almost there. Finally, we have starting equipment. You can choose to start with equipment or gold to buy equipment. I highly recommend choosing equipment as it will tell you exactly what you can and cannot get. However, again, you can talk to your DM if you would have extra possessions because of your character specifically. So, as a wizard, we can have a quarterstaff or a dagger, a component pouch or an arcane focus. I'm going to choose a wand because I'm classic, obviously. And then a scholar's pack or an explorer's pack. These contain different things. You also get a spell book. And then as a sage, so this is our background again, we get some other things. This is a letter from a dead colleague. That's kind of interesting. A little bit of extra roleplay stuff. Then you would click Add Starting Equipment. Very important, otherwise it will not go in. Then it's up to you if you want to get other items, possessions, things like that. Again, since this isn't really a character I'm developing, we're going to skip that. And now we are on the character sheet. So, this is your character sheet. This is going to have every bit of information that you will need to play Dungeons & Dragons. Over here, we have our skills stats. Ooh. On the bottom, we have the full score, and on the top we have the modifier, which basically means when you make a roll to do a thing, you will add the modifier to it. Now, because this is a website, when you click on the little box here, it lights up. It will add it for you as well as rolling. So I will give an example of that after explaining the rest of the character sheet. Inspiration. You can be given inspiration by the DM or by a bard, which is a different class. This basically gives you a little extra boost. You add a d4 to a roll that you make in case you need to make it a little higher. This is your health box. You can put in the amount of hit points that you would either gain or lose based on if you're being healed or damaged. There's also a spot for temporary hit points if you get cursed or blessed or something like that. Here you have defenses and conditions. A condition would be like poisoned or blinded, and a defense would be if you are resistant or immune or vulnerable to certain things. We don't have any here, but for example, a tiefling, which is part demon, would have a resistance to fire. Here we have our armor class. This is basically how protected you are. In order to get injured, an attack will have to match or beat that number. 11 is very bad. Then you have your initiative, which is +1 for us. And the initiative is when you are going into combat, you roll a die, and you, based on the number, it depends on what order you will be going in terms of fighting. I hope that made sense. I am going to put another marker here really quickly since we finished character creation and are now doing character sheet explanation. Okay, over here you have what's called saving throws. These are essentially when you're attacked with something, it may need you to make a saving throw in order to see if it affects you or not, usually spells. They will tell you if you do that, if it requires that, and you would just click on the the circle, and that will roll it for you. Anything with a little dot here implies that you are proficient in it, so again, it would be giving you the stat modifier plus the proficiency bonus, which for us right now is +2. Your walking speed is 30 feet. This is standard. That is how far you can move in combat. Combat mats are usually in grid form, with each square being 5 feet, so you could then move 6 feet. Over here, we have senses. So your passive wisdom is your perception score. How much do you notice when you're not paying attention, essentially? Passive investigation, same thing, but investigating. And passive wisdom is insight. All of these are basically what do you notice when you're not actively trying. Dark vision basically means you can see in the dark and in dim light. In dim light as if it were like totally lit up, and in darkness as if it were dim light. Very useful. Then we get into proficiencies and languages. So basically, what kind of things can you do? Armor? None. This is not good. Wizards are what we call squishy. So there are two types of character sort of nicknames. You have squishy, which are weak, essentially. Weak, easily injured characters. Tanks, which are big, strong, will take lots of damage. Take lots of damage. Those are the main nicknames. Everything else is self-explanatory, so I'll put those in. Alright, back to the sheet. Other things that we are proficient in, certain weapons. This will let us use the proficiency bonus when we use these weapons. We have no tool proficiencies, and then we have the languages we speak, which can be useful if you are handed like a book, and it's in a language that's not common. Okay, how are you feeling? I know this is a lot, but we are going to get through it. We are halfway-ish done. With the character sheet, I mean, not with the whole thing. So over here we have skills, and these are all the things, essentially, that you may need to do. It's called making a skill check. So if you want to do something and it requires a skill, your DM will say roll a skill check or roll a whatever name of the skill check. For example, let's say I want to search for a key to the room that I'm in for the door. My DM would probably tell me to roll an investigation check. So I would click here and it would roll a d20 for me, which is the standard die for skill checks, and add the modifier, which is a 5, giving us a 15, which is quite a good score. The skills are, as you can see, acrobatics, animal handling, arcana, athletics, deception, history, insight, intimidation, investigation, medicine, nature, perception, performance, persuasion, religion, and sleight of hand. And stealth and survival. All of the skills are dependent on a certain stat, and that is the modifier that is added to them, as well as if you are proficient in it, then the bonus is added as well. That is why for arcana, we have a +5, so that would be the intelligence modifier of +3, plus the proficiency bonus of +2. Failing these are not great. If you roll a skill check and it's not good, you will probably not be able to do the thing that you want to do. Speaking of which, here we have all of the dice, as I mentioned. So D20, D12, D10, D100, D8, D6, and D4. They're all used for various things, which I will show you when we get into actions, but skill checks are used with a D20 as our saving throws, and are most things really. So you would roll one of those, and then as I said, add your modifier to whatever the thing is. Alright, now if you come over here, this is your actions. What kind of things can you do, basically? This is often for combat, but not 100%. There are other things that it could be used for. For example, if you are a caster, you don't necessarily have to be in combat to cast magic. And that is something you'll need to keep track of. So as you can see up here, there are different categories: actions, spells, equipment, features and traits, description, notes, and extras. And then inside actions, you can divide those more thoroughly into attack, action, bonus action, reaction, other, and limited use. So when you're in combat, you have a couple things you can do. You can talk, that is a free action, which means you can do it as much as you want. You can move, which is up to your full walking speed, so you can move up to 30 feet. You can have an action and a bonus action. Now, if we start from the beginning, we will look at attack. Right now it gives us spell options. If we were to go into our equipment and equip our weapons, which means clicking on the box next to them, then they would appear in your actions. So if we pop back over here into actions, you can see now that under attack we have the dagger. So in attack we have different spells and then the dagger. The hit DC, you need to roll to hit, and then you would add the modifier to this. So for the dagger, we are adding a +3, which is our dexterity modifier plus our proficiency modifier, because we are proficient in a simple or melee weapon. This is a melee weapon. As I said, a lot of this can be really complicated, so I really like that the website does this for you. I am particularly bad at figuring out what to add to an attack roll, so the fact that they do it for me is very useful. But usually it is either the strength or dex modifier based on the type of weapon plus proficiency bonus if applicable. Once you roll to hit, if you succeed, you would then roll damage, which is listed here. The little symbols essentially mean what type of damage it does. Certain creatures may be resistant or weak to certain types of damage, so this is always good to keep in mind. Then there are other notes, so what kind of things you might need to do for a spell. Somatic and verbal means that to cast this spell, you need to be able to speak, and the victim needs to be able to hear it. So, what if you don't want to attack during your action? There are other things you can do. Other actions you can do include an unarmed strike, which would be hitting someone. For that, you would add your proficiency bonus if possible, or strength modifier. Or it looks like here it's adding my dex modifier. Not sure why. I guess it's a melee attack, but that is good because my strength is -1. Other options, as you can see here, are actions in combat. So you can attack, cast, dash, which means doubling your movement. So you would be able to move 60 feet, but you would then lose your action. Disengage means deciding to leave the combat, because if you try to run from combat, if an enemy is next to you, they get what's called an attack of opportunity. They can attack you even if it's not their turn, basically. Dodge, grapple, help, hide, improvise, ready, search, shove, or use an object. Really the most important ones here are attack, cast, dash, or disengage, or maybe grapple. Now a bonus action is something you can do as a separate thing. Basically, it's a bonus. So we don't actually have any right now besides 2-weapon fighting if we were to wield 2 weapons, but depending on what your class and race are, you might have other options. A reaction is what happens in a reaction. So if an enemy tries to run away from you, you also have the opportunity to attack, and there are a plethora of other options. They would show up here. Then you have other, which would be interacting with an object, ritual spells, which means that you can cast your spells more slowly, essentially. Or you can use this arcane recovery, which is recovering some of your spell slots, as I mentioned. There's also limited use, and that would be this, because you can do it once per long rest. I did forget to mention, up here we have short rest and long rest. A long rest is essentially an overnight, and once you complete a long rest, which you can do by just clicking, you will regain all of your health and spell slots and be healed from a fair amount of things. A short rest is only a couple hours, but you can still recover some things, as well as roll what's called a hit die, which will give you a temporary amount of health back. So your hit die are determined by your class. So we have a d6 for that. I am actually not seeing where that is located. I think probably when you were to click a short rest, it would be there. But you would be able to roll that and gain some of your health back temporarily. Now we have spells. So spells, as I mentioned, was something that we need to prep as wizards. You can prep X amount of spells or use as a ritual, and that will give you an option, essentially. So up here we have cantrips, which, as I said, you can use an unlimited amount. So if you were to attack something, you would use your roll to hit and then roll damage if it succeeds. Now, your modifier here, your spellcasting modifier, is your intelligence. So you would use that modifier. Your spell attack modifier is then the attack plus your proficiency bonus, so that's a 5. That would equal 5. And that is what you would add when you are rolling to hit something in order to see if it will hit. So let's say I want to cast Firebolt. I would click on the 5 here. I would roll a d20. I got a 16 plus 5 is 21. That is very good. Oh, I think it's not showing because I put it away. Yes. This is very good. So that would most likely beat someone's armor class, which means it would hit. So then you would click on Effect, rolling damage. In this case, it is 1d10, and we got a 5, so they would take 5 points of fire damage, as you can see here with the little flame. Looking here, you can manage spells, and this will essentially help you understand what's going on. So in your spellbook, you see the amount of spells that you can prepare as a wizard at first level, which is 4. And so we can do, I think, 1 more. And cantrips do not count for this, I should note. We'll do this one, I guess. And then we will see what else we need to prepare. We do have a couple options as rituals. So we'll prepare... rituals do not count as prepared spells. They're something you can do. So you'll go to your spellbook, click which spells you want to prepare. If you need to add more spells, you would click that here. Again, I'm pretty sure you would have a limit on how many spells you would know, but I don't have that here. Then you have spell slots. So these are the amount of times you can cast a spell that is not a cantrip. They, as I said, reset for each long rest. So we have 2 first level spell slots, meaning we could cast any of these twice. If we cast something as a ritual, it does not count, but it would take longer. So, for example, I want to cast Charm Person, so I would click Cast. The spell slot would be filled up, which means it is gone. And here we have a DC. So instead of me rolling something to attack, my opponent would need to roll a save to see if they are able to resist the spell or not. And your save DC is right here, and it is 8 plus your spell attack modifier, which is 13 for us. So as you can see here, it needs to be a wisdom save. So they would roll a wisdom save, and if they got a higher than 13, it would not affect them. If it did, they would be charmed, and it will let you know what that does if you click on the spell. Very useful. As I said here, this tab is your equipment, so this is everything you have. If you want to minimize things a bit, you have your inventory, you have your attunement, so if you have magic items, you may need to do something to make them work for you, essentially, and that takes time. And then you have other possessions, which are essentially things that you can't use, but you have, usually for backstory purposes, as well as currency, which is money. Features and traits are overall racial and class traits, so pretty much what we saw during the picking, so what we chose what we saw when we chose the class and the race. All of those are described here. It's nothing we really don't know. And they're usually marked in other places. So for example, the Fey ancestry means that we can't be put to sleep and have advantages on being charmed. That's in the saving throw section. The Keen Senses gives us proficiency in the perception skill, which is noted on your skill sheet. Basically, it does all of this for you. Then you have your description, which you would fill in yourself, as well as notes, and then basically anything extra. Whew. And that's your character sheet. And so basically the other options are, if you want to edit anything, you would click this builder. Oop. Or if you want to just edit the sheet itself, you would click this little gear, and it will give you some options. You can change how it looks, you can manage your levels, you can take any of the rests, you can change the portrait, things like that, and you can also share it or export it to a PDF. There are ways to connect your D&D Beyond account to Discord in case you are playing that way. That way your dice rolls and things would show up. And I think you just click on it, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But that is D&D in a nutshell. So I hope this was helpful and sort of made sense. I did go over this rather quickly, so if you have any questions, please let me know. But I'm very glad that I was able to do this, and I hope I was able to help you. But basically, D&D is an exercise in creativity. The world, your character, can be whatever you want. don't feel boxed in by the sort of high fantasy aesthetic that D&D has. That is conventional, but you can really do anything. A modern world in New York City, or a steampunk world, anything like that really, or your own world, whatever you can think of. If you're looking for more ways to learn about D&D without actually playing, you can look for D&D streams here on Twitch, or podcasts, or YouTube streams. There are so many out there. I particularly love the Adventure Zone, but there are loads of options to see all different ways of playing. And of course, there are other TTRPGs out there that you are more than welcome to look at. They might be a little bit simpler in terms of rules, which could be useful if you're still intimidated by D&D, but this is probably one of the more well-known ones, which is why I wanted to show it to you. The only other thing I want to mention is D&D Beyond has forums in case you want to find a group or a DM. This is very useful. Obviously, they have other forums, lots of them, but you can find what you're looking for if you scroll through. And my last tip for you is you can read a lot about the information here in the game rules. Sources are the different books that you have to purchase. As you can see, there are a lot. The adventures are pre-made adventures that you can purchase in order to play an adventure without creating everything yourself. This is for if you're a DM. However, if you look on the internet, there are ways to access a lot of the source books without having to pay for them in case you want other options. But yeah, I hope this was helpful. I am still kind of in shock that I did it. This is the latest I have ever streamed. But thank you so much for watching. I encourage you to follow or subscribe, and I will see you soon, probably playing Danganronpa again. So have a good night.